Thanks for staying with us today on Face to Face. We're talking about a couple of cases of maybe potential abuse or misdoings at local resorts with a couple of attorneys who are handling the cases. We asked Metro to be here to talk about the cases. They declined. But let me show you, Mr. Sugarman, this case that occurred at the Hard Rock. Let me show you what Under Sheriff Wingate said about the two officers who were involved in that one.
The young officers were told that the actions they participated in and that they saw were inappropriate and are not going to be condoned or accepted by our organization.
Let's talk about Metro's behavior in this one. They acted pretty quickly to reprimand these officers, as I understand it.
I believe so, and I said I'm not that familiar with as far as what Metro did or didn't do, or the officers themselves. I would just say that that's very important to immediately investigate and take appropriate action and make it clear to other officers it's not going to happen.
To send a message both inside Metro and to the community that they're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I should say that you're not suing the police department. You're involved in the whole wrongful termination end of
Right.
this.
My concern is the fact that when my client came forward, the Hard Rock fired him.
Yeah. Let's talk about what your client is saying in terms of how he was concerned about how the police acted. Let me show you what he had to say.
All right.
We have the right to expect a police force that acts as professionals. And there is no reason why we should tolerate anything less.
I think that's pretty much how anybody would feel in the circumstances. On the other hand, wouldn't you say that, this could have been just an aberration? Wingate mentioned these were young officers. Maybe they just did something that was stupid, and they could end up being the best cops we've ever had in this city.
Again, I can't speak to that, but I would say this, that if the people that observe it, the surveillance people, and that's one thing about hotels is everything is observed and videotaped. If those people are afraid to come forward, then we'll never know how often this happens or infrequently it happens. And that's the problem I have.
You're involved in a lot of these kinds of cases. Or you represent, as you mentioned, employees all the time. You've represented casino employees before, I believe. Do you think there's a pattern here or not?
Well, there is to the extent that casinos obviously do not want to make waves, and there's also a relationship between the casinos and Metro.
What's the relationship? What do you mean by that?
Well, as you know, this town is run by the gaming industry, and so everything is very incestuous. And
I'm shocked to hear that. You're making news here.
If the hotel's surveillance or their security people pick somebody up, then Metro comes and takes them off. So all that relationship has to work smoothly, and if the hotel complains, then there may be a problem. But somewhere along the line, there has to be accountability, and people have to know that if they come forward and see something and they complain, they are protected.
What do you think about this whole notion that there's a culture, this coziness between Metro and the casinos?
I completely agree. I mean, take a look. If you look at the videotape in its entirety, you see security guards standing around letting Metro do this. I mean, there's definitely a conspiracy.
Well, when you say conspiracy, you don't mean that in a legal sense, do you?
No. What I mean by it is there is a relationship, and they have to. He's right. They have to keep the relationship in order to keep this town, moving, keep it going along. But then there's also a time when when the security guards should step up to the bat and say, "Hey, look, you shouldn't be beating this guy." They have an obligation too.
Yeah, but I guess the question, and this is raised more by his case than yours, but maybe you can comment in the abstract on this. You would think that the Gaming Control Board has to take some role here. If there is this pattern that both of you gentlemen are alleging, then who is going to enforce this if not the Gaming Control Board and say to these casinos, you are going to be punished severely? It's a privileged license in this state. Doesn't the Gaming Control Board have discretion here?
I think they do. I think they have a duty to take a look at some of this stuff.
Is there any evidence that they're going to change and that maybe they will, besides the fact that we're making an issue of it here?
Not that I know of, but legislation could be adopted if that's what they need. But the reality is these surveillance people are licensed. The security officers are licensed through the Gaming Control Board in some level, so they do have a dual obligation. And the Gaming Control can certainly step in and say, look, if we're going to be monitoring these people, then we have a right to protect them if they do come forward.
Do you think that the Gaming Control Board, this is just so low down on their priority list? Is that the reason they won't do it? Because you said they can adopt new regulations. The regulations as they're written now, they give them pretty broad discretion. I mean, again, I mentioned it's a privileged license. That means that they can take away that privilege just by saying, wait a second, you got to come and explain yourself to us.
Well, I remember I was involved in the case of Ralph Engelstadt, whenever he had the parties.
You had parties for Adolf Hitler. That was many years ago.
Right.
That's
They came in and said, no, that's inappropriate, and they reprimanded him. So, I mean, they clearly
They fined him $1 million, I believe, was the largest fine in history at the time, I believe.
Exactly. So they have the ability But it may be that they're stretched too thin. I don't really know. But the point is, something needs to be done, and thank God the press is bringing this to light.
All right, let's talk about the ACLU. As you know, Gary Peck has gotten involved in this, and he had some very strong words for the relationship between the cops and the resorts. Let me show you what he had to say. He said, it's pretty obvious police and casinos have no interest in doing anything meaningful about the problem. I guess what I'd ask you first, Mr. Segelman, is did you agree with that? And is it because basically they can get away with it?
I think so, and that's where the ACO comes in, because ultimately there is a legal system we have, and we have either civil lawsuits like I have for the employee or civil lawsuits like he has for the customer. But ideally, I don't think you'd have to have the ACLU and lawyers suing privately. I think you could have government agencies come in and do what we're trying to accomplish.
Such as the Gaming Control Board, as I mentioned.
Right.
Well, what do you think about what Mr. Peck said?
I think he's hit the nail on the head. I mean, to be honest with you, I think there should be some sort of regulations or something for the way these two entities are dealing with each other.
But are you hopeful that that's going to happen?
It's not going to happen.
Why isn't it going to happen?
It just is not.
Why do you say that?
Because I think that the gaming industry here in Las Vegas is too strong. I mean,
well, let me play devil's advocate here. And again, we asked Metro to appear here. They would not come on. Let me speak for the casinos, as Mr. Segelman says I often do, and say this. You know what? So these are a couple of attorneys who have cases. They're doing their jobs. They're making money. These are isolated cases. As a Metro spokesman said, there are countless contacts every day, every week between the cops and people at resorts. And so you found a couple of isolated incidents. This is not a pattern.
Actually, it's not isolated. I mean, since then, I've gotten half a dozen cases that are fairly similar to this, and in some way or another.
Since this incident?
Since this incident.
Have you filed actions in those cases?
One we actually have about a week ago. It was in the Las Vegas Sun, and a couple other ones. We're still gathering evidence, so we can file cases.
You can make your whole career out of doing this now.
Yeah.
They can stay alive.
well, let's not go that far. But what do you think about, again, just a general point, and I'm not being facetious about this. I mean, they do say, Metro says, these are isolated instances. This doesn't happen consistently, and I'm sure the casinos would say the same thing. Listen, we police our people. This is a privileged license. We want to protect that license. It brings us millions of dollars. Maybe these are just isolated cases.
Without knowing more, how do we know? But the point is, you want to have a system where people are encouraged to report, and then we will all feel comfortable that that's the case. Because, frankly, realistically, for us to say these are the only two cases would be naive. I mean, if we see it, it's probably the tip of the iceberg.
And really, the issue that I brought up before, this chilling effect that's created by a case such as yours, where a guy sees something that's clearly wrong, and does whatever he needs to do to make sure it gets into the proper course, and then is fired for that. What do you think people who are reading that story in the newspaper are thinking, who work at casinos?
Absolutely. I mean, if I were in surveillance at another casino, I wouldn't come forward, that's for sure.
And if something does not come out of your case, you would think either maybe both the officers being fired for this and you probably having some kind of court victory on this. Think about the message that sends about this town too.
Yeah, I only wish that I had that the surveillance officer in my case was his client.
Exactly, because but still, you still got a lot of evidence in this
We
case
do,
with
but there's some that's missing. I mean, there is some that's missing.
Was that
clearly.
videotape doctored, do you think?
Yes, I do.
You believe it was doctored?
There's like 15 seconds missing.
Well, boy, if they cut out stuff, it must have been pretty bad considering what's left on the videotape.
Like I said, the part that's, I think they just missed that part of it.
How could they miss that? There's a guy there on the ground in handcuffs. He's getting punched.
The first time I watched it, I missed it. So it was just a quick punch, and I just happened to catch it. But the part that's missing is the officer throwing my client into the wall, and it's clear.
Which again, you can't prove, but you believe you have evidence that shows.
We have evidence showing that it happened.
Is that what you think broke his neck?
That's what broke his neck for sure.
And they threw him against the wall.
Yep. So
hard that it made an actual dent in the wall.
That's correct.
And when is this going to court?
Well, I mean, we filed the action. We're still waiting for answers from Metro and in Las Vegas Club, but it's going to take a little while.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks for being here today. We appreciate it. It's a very important issue. I'm glad you're here to talk about it.
Thank you.
All right.